Whew. Good afternoon. We're going to be looking at Psalm 61 today. Um, Sorry about the kind of unreliability of Psalms Bible study lately. There's been a myriad of things that have come up on Thursdays. But I'm looking forward to spending some time with you today in Psalm 61. Psalm 61 is a individual lament psalm. We've gone over many of these. The bulk of the psalms are individual and then also communal lament psalms. That's the biggest category. If you wanted to break them up in categories, now make no mistake, the literary structures that we have from Gunkel. He was a Old Testament researcher. We call it his forms, right, are things applied after the fact. They were not written according to Gunkel's descriptions, obviously, right? These are things that he's noticing, right? Like sometimes the Psalms have like all of the things he mentions, or maybe four or three or just a few, but it's just a manner for us to understand the Psalms. Poetry by itself, it can be difficult, complex to understand. So if we can maybe categorize them a little bit, and then we can look for things that we might expect out of them. In the same way that we can kind of page through the hymnal and know why a certain hymn fits into this section as opposed to a different section. Maybe it's a baptismal hymn, or it's a communion hymn, or something like that. That's what we're really trying to do. Now, what are some of the aspects that we might be able to expect out of a individual complete Psalm 61? Well, here are some of the things we might expect. First, a summons to Yahweh. In other words, a kind of a cry out to Yahweh, like the beginning of a prayer that He might listen. Okay. Then complaint or lament proper, right? Often preceded by a description of the prayer. So at some point, the psalmist will clearly iterate what the problem is. David is usually pretty good about this. When he writes a lament psalm, he gives us an idea of what's going on. A third thing to consider, considerations inducing Yahweh to intervene, whether by challenging Yahweh's honor, exciting his anger by citing the enemy's words, or by the nature of the complaint itself. This is pretty common, where David will basically kind of try to get Yahweh to act because the people who are oppressing him are Yahweh's enemies. They're the enemies of the word, you might say, the promises of God. That's pretty common. It also is common to maybe call out Yahweh by his honor. Like, in other words, these things shouldn't happen on your watch. You're a good and gracious and merciful, loving God. Why is your servant, i.e., David, suffering? He will say things like that. Yeah. Now, petition and treaty. This is a fourth thing we might expect. This is the most significant part of the complaint psalm. May be of a general nature or may be quite specific. Petitioner and treaty would be the complaint would be what's going on, right? The lament, what's happening. The petitioner and treaty is what the psalmist wants God to do. So, very simply, David's complaining about the enemies of Yahweh, for example, persecuting him. His answer would be, punish them, O Lord, consume them, something like that, right? He's asking the Lord to act and to do something. And then 5, conviction of being heard. Not always there, but sometimes. Just the kind of state like, I know that you hear me. I know that you've heard me, that you will answer my call. These kinds of things. Now, a lament psalm is an important thing to help people move from a place, a negative bad place emotionally to a place of trust in God, which actually fairly useful in all eras of the church, right? Suffering will never go away. It's part of the sinful world. Christian people, God's children, will suffer. When they suffer, how will they react to that suffering? Will they turn away from God or turn towards Him? Well, lament psalms are good in that they help us not turn away from God, but in fact, commonly you can identify with the psalm. Perhaps the psalm isn't speaking exactly to what you're going through, but suffering for the word of God, suffering persecution, suffering sickness or illness or disease, right? We can identify with these things. We can maybe identify with what the psalmist is going through, and then we can move along with them towards, knowing that God will handle this as He handles all things. He will make all things come together for good for those who love Him, and that He will hear our prayers and answer our calls, right? So we end up in a place of trust in God, and usually, typically, um, the methodology, the way in which a person moves from a place of sadness or fear or anger to a place of trust is by looking at the past. What mighty acts has God done in the past? What can I look back on and realize that He took care of me before? He will take care of me in the future. The favorite of the psalmists is to call, or I should not say favorite, but the one that comes up the most would be pointing backwards to the Red Sea crossing and saying, "Look, this is God saving His people. He saved us once; He'll save us again." Less commonly used, the crossing the River Jordan when they go into for the conquest. There are some other minor play. I mean, not that any of these are minor. What I mean by minor is they're not used as often, but there are some other examples where the Psalms will kind of harken back to a Old Testament story as a basis. David sometimes will harken back to his previous life when he was out fighting and won battles that he shouldn't have won, um, to kind of prove to himself or prove to his listeners that since God did something in the past, He's going to do it in the future, which is, I think, a helpful thing for us. Human beings are corporeal entities. We live at one point in time. We can't live in the future. We can't live in the past. What can we do? We can live in the now. Unfortunately, with the now, there is a lot of waiting. We know what lies for us in the future, right? Either the little judgment day, our death, where we get to go to heaven and be with Christ, or the last judgment day, which is judgment day for everyone, where we get to live with Christ in the new heavens and new earth, right? This is an exciting prospect, but we are left with time to wait. And waiting can be one of the most difficult things to do. Waiting for God, God moves according to His purposes, according to His timelines, when and where He wills. He's not going to move on your schedule, right? So, waiting for Him can at times be difficult. How can we wait in joy, wait in hope? Well, we look back to the past and realize that, we were standing on one side of the Red Sea and we thought it was all over. We were all dead. And then the Lord opened up the sea. We walked across on dry ground, right? There was a period of waiting there that probably seemed like ages because it was so terrifying. So now, even now, we can wait in trust, wait in faith and hope that the Lord will indeed deliver on His promises as He has in the past. Okay, so Psalm 61, it's a shorter psalm. I think we should be able to handle it all today at a fairly short amount of time. Let's begin. So, Le Lam Nasea al Negenat La David. Okay, so La Lamnasea to the chief musician on a stringed instrument. Now, let's look this word up here just for fun and see if there's any more additional information. sometimes they'll have like some maybe more cultural understanding. Okay, so here we can. There's a little bit here. Um, from Nagan, properly instrument of music by implication, a stringed instrument. Uh, I thought it said here that it was plucked. That would maybe kind of help us, but I didn't see it in there. To touch or play a stringed instrument, pluck the strings. Yeah. So there's a context here of so not a bowed instrument, a plucked instrument. So it gives you a little sense of what a harp, a lyre, that kind of sound, as opposed to a violin or cello, a bowed instrument, right? It gives you a sense a little bit of the sound. Now, the thing is, we have musicians. The chief musician will be the one in charge of the music. How many of these nuggets are we talking about? Well, it could be a whole chorus of them, which was common in Greek culture. We know that we've got some of that written down, which is, still a ways in the future, but it was common for Greek stringed instruments to basically play in octaves. So you'd have, one on a C and then one on a C below, and then they'd play kind of, they just stay in. So they didn't have like chordal structure like we would, but rather just octaves, and then they would play notes, melodies, right? And so they'd have a chorus that would have like a lot of different notes, but all the same note, just in octaves, and they'd move around. So don't think of it. I mean, is David writing this on, as he writes, is he writing it on his own lyre? Most likely. Um, would it be performed with just one lyre? I don't necessarily think so. So, in other words, we're thinking, how does it sound to sing a lament psalm, which talks about some pretty heavy topics with one instrument? It would seem strange, wouldn't it? Like this heavy topic, but there's just one plucking instrument. Well, no, there might be more power behind it. There might be many plucked instruments playing, and then there's this chorus of harps, and there's power behind it. We don't really know for sure, but it was common in the ancient world to have choruses of instruments. Many, in other words, many, people playing the same instrument, perhaps playing, like I said, octaves, but not necessarily like. Don't think of it as chords, right? It would not have sounded like kind of like what we have now in terms of the Western world, equal temperament and melody and harmony kind of structure. It wasn't like that. So, going on then. Okay, it's a Psalm of David, so we know who wrote it. And I think whenever we have a La David, we should just appreciate the text for what it is. It is God's word. It is inerrant and true. So when it says it's by David, we shouldn't doubt that it's by David. And that means if we know it's by David, we do have a historical time period, right? I mean, it's a big time period, but at least we have like 80 years here where we know the psalm was written, and that gives us at least uh, not a bullseye, but at least a dartboard to get close, right? So here we go. We're going into the text itself. So remember how we were talking about having a what is it? A summons to Yahweh? Well, here we go. Shema Elohim. Hear, O God. I mean, it couldn't be clearer, right? Shema Elohim Renati Haksiba Tepelati. Hear, O God, my cry. Attend to my prayer, right? So, I mean, I don't think there's a lot of meaning there that we have to unpack. It's David calling out to God, listen to me, right? And now we're going to get into probably more stuff that we can unpack, right? Mikseh haaretz elaka akra ba'atap lebi besur yarum mimeni taheni. That's interesting. Um, so I think it's katsek is end. So then the meme gives us the from. So miksek, we get from the end. Haaretz, eretz we've had before, right? Earth. So end of the earth. Aleka is basically just a pronoun, or I should say a preposition with a pronoun behind it, right? From the end of the earth to you, ekra. So we have um, uh, the aleph here, I believe, is a prefix. I think it's kara is the word, which is to call out or to cry. I'm pretty sure. I'll look at that real quick. Yeah, kara. Kara, to call, to proclaim, to read. And then I think the aleph here is just to set it off as a call imperfect. So I will cry. From the end of the earth, I will cry to you. So it really is roughly from the end of the earth to you, I will cry. We would probably flip those two in English. When is overwhelmed? Wondering how the yeah. Okay. So from the end of the earth, I will cry to you. I think that we have a break. When my heart is overwhelmed, break. Lead me to the rock that is higher than I. Basically, it actually goes, when is overwhelmed my heart, to the rock that is higher than I, lead me. Which it's kind of interesting how Hebrew always, I think this is kind of like where they ripped off Yoda talk from in Star Wars, was just how Hebrew changes things around. And so the most important thing here, lead me, is at the end. Um, yeah, to the rock that is higher than I, lead me. So that um, kind of in a sense of like this call out for prayer. The very last thing that the psalmist says in verse 2 is that request, right? Lead me, lead me. Um, Not a lot here. So from the end of the earth, I think like far as the east is from the west, anywhere in the world, just like anywhere, right? I will, because God is everywhere, right? He's larger than everything. So he's just saying, anywhere that I am, I will cry to you when my heart is overwhelmed. Now that, I think that speaks a lot. Just, I mean, it's human, right? And I think we can understand it even without having to be a Hebrew person in this ancient time, right? When my heart is overwhelmed, with what? Well, if he's asking to be led to the rock that is higher than I, in other words, to something bigger than me, I wouldn't imagine this would be my heart is overwhelmed with joy, which is a possibility, but I don't think it's the case here. Probably with sadness, maybe fear, anxiety, dread, yeah, anger, even. My heart is overwhelmed to the rock uh, that is higher than I, lead me. Now, I can't help but think about, so we're supposed to be led to a rock that is higher than I. And I wonder, if there's another meaning for higher than I, higher too. Let's take a look at that. To be high or exalted, more exalted than I. Okay, well, that is interesting. There's even a sense of triumphant, you know? Well, because when I look at it, I can't help but think about Jesus, right? Because Paul says, who is very acquainted with the Old Testament scriptures, that he says in First Corinthians, the rock that followed the people of Israel through the desert, that rock was Christ, right? And what does David want? He wants to be led to a rock that is more exalted than he is. You can't help but think about David then, where he says, I said to my Lord, right? Uh, Saying like this idea that my ancestor, my descendant, right? My descendant, someone who will come from my line will actually be my Lord, will be greater than me. This is what David was saying. And so he wants to be led to this rock that is more exalted, is greater, is higher than he is. Um, Yeah. So not only do I think that is prophetic and talking about Christ, honestly, I can't help but not, but also uh, I think we can understand on a personal level too. When your heart's overwhelmed, you want to be led to something solid, something firm that is greater than myself. Like, so in other words, 9/11 happens, right? I remember when I was back in college, 9/11 happens and the church was full of people because something terrible had happened and they wanted something firm, something that they knew from their youth, something they could trust in. You had a lot of kids who weren't in church very regular, but then they were there because they wanted that comfort of something greater than themselves. Yeah. Okay, going on to verse 3. Ki hayita maseh li migdal oz bepeni oyeb. Oh yeah, that's the whole thing. Sorry. So ki is a preposition for four, or actually, sorry, conjunction for four. Um, for you have been a shelter for me, a strong tower from the enemy. Okay, so I think the first part of verse 3 is maybe referring to a shelter would be getting out of the elements, right? You protect me from the heat of the day, the rain that comes, the hail that comes, the storms that brew, the thunder that drops, the lightning. So I think shelter is talking like you've been a place of protection. I go to you and I can get out of the storms that are raging around me. And then we get a strong tower from the enemy. Well, um, pretty basic stuff. High ground. You want to be above the enemy, be able to see them coming and to be able to shoot down at them as opposed to shoot up. And a strong tower, reinforced tower, well protected or well built tower is a good place to be because your enemy can't get to you. There was a look it up if you'd like. There's a place called Meteora in Greece, and what the I think in like the 1600s, the Greek Orthodox monks they built churches and houses, well, I should say monasteries, on top of large rocks. Um, and the reason they did this is because the Muslims were coming in and out of the country on various conquests, trying to conquer the West. They were going through these places, so their idea was, well, we'll build up on top of these mountains, these boulders, huge boulders. I mean, the size of mountains, right? They build these monasteries up there, and then they could just pull the rope ladder up, and you couldn't get to them, right? They were out of the enemy's ability to wage war or to get at them. I think that's what's going on here. The tower, it's high, it's strong, it's secure. It keeps me away from my enemy. It keeps the enemy out, right? Can't get to me. So what does this mean in David's life? Let's say historically. Well, there's plenty of times where so David goes up north and gets caught by the kings. He pretends he's crazy. They let him go. David. Jonathan protects him from his father. There's a couple times where Saul has him kind of trapped and he manages to escape. So there's lots of ways in David's own life that the Lord has protected him, given him shelter, and also fortified him and kept him safe from his enemies. Right. So I mean that works out. But then if we think about every time we look at a psalm, we could always understand as well that the psalmist could be David speaking his own life, but as David speaks prophetically, it can also be the words of Christ, as in when we read Psalm 22, Psalm 31, Psalm 103, even like 42, 46. There's a bunch of them where it's clearly you can understand that it's Christ speaking, right? So if that's the case, if we wanted to look at it that way, I got a comment. I want to see if it's Okay, it isn't. I thought maybe it was a note or a question for. Um, um, so we have. What things can we point to in terms of Christ's life? You've been a shelter for me, a strong tower from the enemy. You know, there are times where Jesus escapes his enemies, although I don't think he needs protection from his Father, obviously. Um, but he dwells with his Father. He prays to his Father. He communicates to his Father. So I think his Father is a place of shelter for him, maybe more along the lines of his Father. Christ's Father is a place of respite, of rest for him. Maybe more accurate. Verse 4. Agura be'ahaleka olamim heseh hesech, excuse me, beseter kenabeka salah. Agura, I will abide. Bahaleka, in your house, in your tabernacle. Olamim, forever. I will trust. Chesech, I will trust in the shelter of your wings. Salah. Good stuff here. Pretty psalm. So, you know, what is David communicating in verse 4? I will abide in your tabernacle forever. Is it a conditional statement that if the Lord protects me in the situation that I'm currently in now, that he'll, you know, is this like a Nazarite vow? He's going to serve or abide in his tabernacle forever? Or is David talking about his wishes that he wants to be in his tabernacle? There's no other place. You know, I'd rather be a doorkeeper in the house of my God than be in the tents of the wicked. Or is David talking about eternity? David talking about after he's gone, after he's dead, you know, at the end of life. I will trust in the shelter of your wings. You know, the interesting thing about it is that they're both proximity related, right? So where do you go to be near God? You go to his tabernacle. And if you're sheltered underneath God's wings, I mean, you're literally being pulled in like chicks, right? You're going to be nestled underneath him like his chicks, like his children. So that is a very Hebrew idea that the closer to God, the better things are. The further away from God, the worse things are, right? So being in a place of shelter, being in a place of protection is drawing as close, drawing as near to Yahweh as I can get. And then it, you know, then we get to point to our Christian understanding or reality of life, right? We have something that even David doesn't have, which is we were baptized and the Holy Spirit was given. And now God lives not near us as in the tabernacle or covering us with his wings. God lives in us. And we take his body and his blood and we eat it, so we consume the Lord, right? His body and his blood. So you want to talk about proximity. Well, now we're even closer to God than David was. What a blessing that is. Yeah. Okay. Verse 5. Ki ata Elohim samata lindare natata yes yerusat yere semeka. So for you, Elohim, God, so Elohim is the generic word for God. Yahweh would be his personal name, and Elohim is far more common. I should say far more common. Usually, you don't see Yahweh with vowels underneath it. So instead you get Jehovah. Hebrews don't say Yahweh out loud. It's kind of it's like saying what Voldemort. You just don't do it. Not in that way. Like Yahweh is such a precious. It's such a precious gift to be given his name that you don't call upon it for any reason other than something really important. So we're um, Second Commandment stuff here, right? Uh, Probably, God doesn't give you his name because he doesn't want you to use it, right? He gives you his name because he does want you to use it. So Luther really picks up on that and says, that we should call upon it, pray, praise, and give thanks. So we should be using it in our life often. We just shouldn't misuse it. Well, Hebrews went a little too far on the one way where they're like, we should never use it. Well, that's not what God wants. He doesn't give it to us because he doesn't want us to use it. He wants us to use it. Anyway, Elohim would be the more generic name for God, which is why we say God. And then whenever we see the Lord and it's capitalized, usually behind that Lord is Yahweh. Okay. So, for you, God, have heard my vows. You have given me the heritage of those who fear your name. I'm curious how the ESV is translated that. So it's verse 5 here. Um, uh, For you, O God, have heard my vows. You have given me the heritage of those who, yeah, so they use heritage as well. So let's look this up, this word Yerusat, get a sense of what heritage means. Possession, inheritance. Yeah, okay. From Yerash, something occupied, a conquest. Also a patrimony, heritage, inheritance, possession. So going back then, is this yeah. So in other words, there is an inheritance. And God promises the promised land and other things as a gift or as an inheritance to those who fear your name. Now, what does it mean to fear God's name? Well, it doesn't mean that we are terrified of him and that's all we are, right? There should be a healthy fear of God. Um, and a fear of God is a knowledge of him, right? We know what he can do, we know what he is capable of. But we also, if we know God, we also know that he loves us and that he routinely chooses compassion versus justice. So we see this in its clearest form that he chooses compassion. He has mercy and compassion on us, and he puts our judgment on Christ, right? So he keeps himself holy. He metes out the punishment that is due for sin. He just doesn't mete it out on us, which is a good thing, right? Which is, I mean, at least it's good for us. So, what does it mean? I think it would be to fear him would be to understand, like, in other words, you don't walk up to a lion at the zoo and put your hand in its mouth, right? But you still enjoy looking at it. Seemingly, we love our God. We draw near to him, but we understand what he can do. We don't go up to him flippantly and just kind of whatever stand. This is the whole point of the story of when David's moving the Ark of the Covenant, and the fellow reaches out to stop it from falling over, and he touches it, and he immediately dies, right? Because our God is a holy God. He when he comes in contact with unholy things, he destroys them. We should be aware of that. We shouldn't act flippantly in front of him because we are unholy, right? But we can come from him, and then he does things like he cleanses our lips and our tongue with coal from the incense altar. He makes us eat a scroll, and it makes us holy, so that we can, or in our context, he baptizes us and he gives us his body and blood. He makes us holy so we can be in his presence and worship him, right? So fearing him is knowing in totality who he is, what he is capable of, but also knowing his love. So to people who understand him, who cling to him, who love him, who have faith in him, who trust him, there is an inheritance, and that inheritance for for Israel is the promised land, but in reality, the promised land is eternity. It is salvation. In verse 6, Yamim al Yameh Melech to Osip Noota Kemodor Vador. Uh, Life upon life of king you will prolong. So you will prolong. Life upon life would be a long life. Let's see how the ESV translates it. Um, Prolong the life of the king. Yeah. Life upon life. You will prolong the life of the king. So you will prolong the life of the king, his years as generations and many generations. So, yeah, his years endure to all generations. Who is the king? Well, David's the king. But you wonder, is David talking about himself? Or is he talking about Christ? He is the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. I make all things new. Um, he is there always. He has been from the beginning, and he will be till the end, and he'll be there forever. Who is the king? Well, I think you can make a case that the Father is the king, but also the Son. Uh, the Son is definitively, Christ is definitively our king, right? He comes into Israel on Palm Sunday. Hosanna to the Son of David. He is the King of Israel. He is the King of the Jews. He is our King. But likewise, he is in submission to his Father. So the Father is King of all. So are we talking about blessing the life of our King or the King of all, or both? Probably could just say both. Keep it simple. Yeah. Melech is a very simple word for king. It's used every time, like David is referred to in prose as king. It's the word Melech. So there's no hidden meaning behind the actual word king. It's a very straightforward word. Verse 7. He shall abide. Yeseb olam lipnei Elohim hesed chesed ve'emet man yinseruhu. Yinseruhu. Excuse me, I put the stress in the wrong place. He shall abide forever. Yeseb, he shall abide forever before God. Then it's lifnei, before God, Elohim, before God, mercy and truth. O prepare which may preserve him. Trying to figure out what goes with what here. I'm thinking that he shall abide forever before God is like one thought. And the he shall abide probably is referring back to the Melech from verse 6, right? So that would make sense then if we're looking at Melech and thinking maybe David would probably more likely Jesus, right? Jesus will abide before God. So we see that picture of Revelation that in the time that is now, the Lamb is on the throne. And on the last day, the Lamb will then in turn the kingdom over to his Father, that all will be in all, right? As the scripture teaches. So let's see how the ESV splits that up here. Verse 7. May he be enthroned forever before God. So they're, instead of abide, they're going enthroned forever, which makes sense, I guess, in the context, right? To sit, to remain, dwell, take a seat. I can see where we would get like, may he be seated, kind of as an idea. And then, if we're talking about a king, where else are you going to sit but on a throne? Right? So that makes sense that they say enthroned. May he be enthroned forever before God. Yeah, I think the enthroned as well really makes us move towards Christ and away from David. Yeah. Although, I think it overlaps a lot, because if David's going to be enthroned, you'd want it to be before God as well, right? I mean, it works both ways. So that we have that first section, maybe enthroned before God forever. Appoint, huh? So, prepare is probably the word for appoint here. So, prepare, appoint, chesed, and truth. We've talked about steadfast love, the chesed word before. Chesed, steadfast love, and truth to preserve him, right? Um, to watch over him, yeah. Verse 8. Cain, Azamera, Simcha, Laad, La Salemi, Nedare, Yavom, Yavom, day by day. I think Yavom, if I remember correctly from my Hebrew class, it's kind of like an idiom. Yavom, day by day. It's just something that Hebrews say. So just meaning day by day. Ken is so I will sing praise, excuse me, to your name, Simcha. Shame is name, so then we put it together, your name, we get Simcha, right? So to your name forever. This is a very common praise song lyric. So I will sing praise to your name forever. It's like all over the place. Um, that I may perform my vows day by day. What are the vows? Well, for a king, it would be different from a regular person, but all Jewish men are, there are requirements for sacrifices, not necessarily for specific things, but just like daily or yearly. Like at the festivals, they're supposed to be making certain kinds of sacrifices, right? So, perform my vows. The vows would be, we could understand this like there's also Nazaritic vows. A Nazarite takes vows to remain like chaste, and they don't cut their beards, and they don't eat or drink certain things. And what they are doing then is devoting their time and their efforts and their resources. They're focusing on God and God alone, right? Now, a lot of people can make connections to the fact that, like, so we have judges. We have the judge Samson, who is a Nazarite. He was supposed to follow Nazarite vows, but he didn't. That was his problem. Um, we think John the Baptist probably took Nazarite vows, and as well as Jesus mentions it a couple times. He talks about it, just Nazarite vows in general. Did Jesus take Nazarite vows? I don't know. So then you kind of think about, well, what's it talking about here that I may perform my vows? If this is the voice of Christ, let's say, and he's speaking, that I may perform my vows day by day. What does that mean exactly? Well, I can point to two things. Number one, that Christ made a promise that he would die for us. So his work of redemption. Now, it's not something he does every day. He's done it once and it's finished. But that could be maybe what he's talking about. That I perform my vows, that vow of death and then resurrection, or he could be speaking about, if it's Christ talking, let's say, right? Perform my vows. Maybe he's speaking about his work of intercession, right? Christ brings our prayers, our needs before God, and then he intercedes on our behalf when God says, why would I give these people anything? They're sinful. And then he says, well, don't look at them. Look at my sacrifice on the cross and my rising from the dead. And on the basis of what Christ has done, then that's why God gives us anything. So maybe it's this work of intercession that is the daily vows, so to speak, that Christ is doing. I think in a Davidic sense, like as David is speaking, we can understand it pretty clearly. The king had responsibilities to offer sacrifices at certain times, to do certain things, to remain faithful, right? That's why the Bible speaks routinely about kings not being faithful. Um, so stuff like that. Uh, Pretty straightforward. So, do we catch some of the things? This one is not your typical lament psalm where the problem that David's going through, he's calling God to punish evildoers. We don't actually get a lot of that, but rather we get positive things, right? Like God lifting up and supporting, God preserving his people. So that would be the thing that David is asking God to do. And then David's response is, when you do these things, I will praise and sing. In other words, how does David respond to God's work? David responds in praise, as would we, right? That's what we do now. God forgives. He gives us His word, His body, His blood. He gives us forgiveness. He gives us daily bread. He just keeps giving, 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 and we lift our voices in praise of Him, of what He has done for us. Yeah. Pretty typical stuff that we would do. I think we caught in terms of the lament psalm then, right? We caught the first part, calling upon Yahweh's name. We got the petitions, and then I'm sorry. Yeah, we got the petition, what we want God to do, and then the conviction. So David makes a vow; he's going to fulfill his vows because he knows God's going to do His part, right? So we caught, like, out of the five, we caught four of them. We didn't get a lot of considerations inducing God to intervene, but we got the rest of it. So, well, I hope that you enjoyed our time together today. I hope you enjoyed the psalm. It's a great psalm, very, very positive, very joyful, points to a lot of good things about God. So you can't go wrong. Psalm 61, it's a good psalm. Good to be with you. Have a wonderful rest of your Thursday, and we'll hopefully see you on Sunday.